Just want to make sure the microphone works. You hear me like that? Good. Okay. So tonight we have all kinds of material that we're going to study together and discover together, and maybe even come up with some new ideas instead of it just being a regular lecture where I just speak for an hour. Although I like to speak, so I'll end up speaking anyway. But we'll be looking at these sources soon. Some of you might already have started to look at it. I'll do it in a particular way. What I wanted to just start out with was a kind of meditation, like a way to get ourselves in a certain frame of mind. Because what we're talking about is trying to maybe get into the minds of our children better, understand them better. And I just was wondering if you all would be interested in the following, which is, you don't have to share this. This is an exercise for yourself. Maybe somebody will want to share it, but that's a different story. But I'm asking if you take a moment to close your eyes and to reflect on your earliest memory. Your earliest memory. You could close your eyes, it might help. I'm not going to be checking because my eyes are closed. So, again, I'm not going to ask anybody if they don't want to share that memory. It was about helping just us get into the kind of right frame of mind. But I am curious about one thing. By a show of hands, how many people here was the memory a positive memory? Okay. Doesn't say anything about you, or your parents, but how many of you was it a negative memory? So, it looks a little bit like in half and half, although I can understand why maybe somebody wouldn't say, yay, I was the one with a negative memory. But it's interesting, at least the room is kind of half and half. Does anybody want to share the memory? You certainly don't have to. It's just to get us into the roots, something about childhood and about child life. Go ahead, sure.
I don't remember how old I was, but I do remember pretending I was sleeping so that my father would pick me up and bring me to my bed. So I wanted to know what it feels like to be picked up, even though we always do it. When I fell asleep in a different place, he would pick me up and bring me to bed. So one day I just pretended I fell asleep. So I wanted to feel like he took me up and bring me to the bed, and I started laughing when he picked me up. So that was like,
Wow, that's an amazing memory. I assume it's a positive memory. I don't know, I'm going to just kind of take a wild shot over here, but are you like a creative, curious person? Because, it's really fascinating, like there's so much going on there, right? And on one hand, you're being taken care of by your father, which is really beautiful. Like you always know, right when you fall asleep, he's going to take you with you. But you're not satisfied with that. Like you have to actually experience it, and the other part is, but I think really it shows you have a decent relationship with him because you were able to show him the gig is up by laughing. You could have pretended the whole time you still were sleeping and kept that your secret. But like you kind of, you kind of showed him jokes on him. That's an amazing memory. I wish we all had great memories like that one. I was thinking, sell that, bottle it up. It's really beautiful. Again, we don't have to spend the night on this. I just do think it does really give us a nice sense of how, childhood. And we all want our children to feel that taken care of. Now you're about to tell me I had a terrible childhood. I don't know. So, anybody else want to share anything before we go into the sharing is also going into the words. Yes?
Remember how my mom, I don't remember how old I was, but buying my new pair of shoes was an experience. That's right.
You happy about the shoes?
Yeah,
Extremely. Isn't that interesting? Like how these little things that kids very beautiful. It's a tough call, right? We want to give our kids things and make them happy, but we don't want them to be spoiled and hold them adults. And then we never really know. But that's a nice memory. You know, what do you think of the fact so far that it's two women that shared their memories and no men? You know, like, I was still from a time before there was like GPSs and smartphones, and it's like, we never rolled down the window and asked for directions. Never. I mean, we could be like lost in, you know, the worst place. No, I got this. I'm going to figure this out. You know, just ask the guy directions. You know, now we don't have to worry about that anymore because the GPSs tell us what to do. But it is interesting, I think, you know, women allow themselves to be a little more vulnerable. Anybody else before we continue? Once? A lot of times, as you know, for whoever had, you know, like I said, you don't have to share these memories, but a lot of times the memories that do come to us are quite significant. It may not be because they're the only ones, it may not be even because they're the first ones, but oftentimes they represent a certain kind of overall feeling or pattern, a theme. At least the memories these two people share certainly sound pretty lovely. Okay, so what I want you to do is like this. The way we have this divided up is, you see on the page you have source 1, source 3. What I'd like you to do is, if you can, keep to source 1 and take 2 or 3 minutes. Have one person one person read it, and the other person reflect on what they're noticing about it. Okay, and then you have questions at the end too, which we're gonna talk about. But just kind of take a couple of minutes to read with your spouse, to read over and look at source number 1. Don't go to source number 2 because we'll go to source number 2 a little later. We're gonna get to source number 1. Okay? Go ahead. By the way, I'll just say it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, as you can see it, both days, but it's just a lovely little medrash that's quite interesting. Some of you guys are talking to each other, which is wonderful. Some of you seem to be more like, we'll just read it quietly, won't say anything. You can do that, it's not school, so, you know, everybody can do what they want. But I do think that it is nice to really share with each other what you think of what we're reading, the ideas or the things that come to you. But I also understand this is not exactly a private venue. As you're comfortable.
You don't ask them, just do something like that.
So, if you can take the pause, I'm trying to gauge like how all you feel. Like, is this the right amount of time for discussion? Did you want to have more time? Was it too much time? It's like, my gosh, 2 minutes alone next to my spouse. Like, tell me seriously. Anybody, was this okay? Was this just right? You okay with that? Okay. So before, I'm going to make this easy, so you don't have to actually talk for yourself. You can say what somebody else told you, which might make it a little bit easier. But I'm asking, even before we get into answering the questions that we have over here, questions 1 and 2, what about the story itself? Like, you notice anything about the story? Is there any reaction you have to this, just to this really interesting story? Any thoughts or feelings that come up about it? Do you want to share? Yes.
It says that Hashem created
Never seated after the manner. The sky returned after me.
Yes.
I came. One came. To the verse of
Yes.
after the manner. Rabbi Hossein.
Uh-huh.
Rab, Jeroboam, by the garments. He sent prophets, etc.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if it means. Okay, I know you probably can't hear it because she's
The
not right.
prophets.
Yeah, so I'll just say what this young woman said. She said that first of all, it's interesting that, Hashem is coming and chasing really after Yeravam and, making this offer. And his answer is not particularly respectful. And then also, you're wondering about walking in the lead. I don't think it means before God. I think it means relative to Yishai, relative to David, the son of Yishai. I think, but it's an interesting point that you make. But what about that, right? That's a very interesting thing, that this is not just an offer, right? And the way the offer is dealt with is fascinating. But this is an offer that God is chasing after him and making him this offer. Right? Just think about that for a second. Let's follow that one away. Anybody notice anything else that they want to share before we even get into the questions? Yes.
Well, I feel like it's the power of Gava.
It's what?
The power of Gava.
The power of Gava. Who's Gava?
Well, basically, he had Gava because he asked Hashem, who's going to walk first? Hashem said, David is going to be before you. And he said no to that.
Mhm.
So he said no, walking with Hashem. The power of Gava is so powerful.
Then he can even say no to God.
Yeah, it's my power.
The power of Gava. So it's a bad thing, the Gava?
Is what I'm sorry?
It's a bad thing,
Yes,
the Gava?
in this case.
In this case. So when would it not be a bad thing?
I mean, every bad trait can be used for good, I guess. But in this case, it was bad.
Right, in this case it was bad. So how do we know it was bad? Because of what happened in the end?
Well, he said no.
Right, if he would have taken the deal, then it would have been good. There's an interesting thing about the word midah, right? The Hebrew word for character trait is midah. I love Lashon Kodesh because Lashon Kodesh, oftentimes, you can go very, very deep. Even some of the, some of the grammarians, most of the words go down to two-letter roots, so that you can really go deep into a word. But for example, right, in English, you would translate a midah as a character trait. Right? But what does midah really mean? What does midah mean? Measure, right? Because it's not a bad thing or a good thing. Yeah? Like in a cake, you have to have a pinch of salt and a cup of sugar. Right? If you had a cup of salt and a pinch of sugar, that would be bad. But if you didn't have any salt, that would be bad too. Right? It's a very important point. So what you're saying about the Gava is true, and yet God is chasing after this man, right? This man, my mother, Hillel Shalom, she would say, it's kind of a Yiddish word, she would say, this man had hasagas, which means like, the best way to say it in English is this man had aspirations, right? So like his Gava was bad in the end, but God's chasing after this man. How many people does God chase after? right? Like it's very interesting. So he's got this quality, and it is gava, which trips him up, true, but it's a quality. And what is that quality? And that's where we start beginning to get into our questions. Like, what is this quality that he has that trips him up, but actually is a quality, maybe the very same quality that even God is chasing after him? You want to say something? Is it gava? Is it gava?
Absence of humility.
Maybe an absence of humility is true.
He's a little stiff.
I think he doesn't want to settle. He wants to be the best. And he wants to, yes?
Only himself and someone the party.
Yes. But again, right, it could be perverse or it could be quality, right? He wants to be the best.
Perfectionist.
Well, that's when it takes the dark side, right? They're perfectionists that never accomplish anything because it's so impossible for them to take the risk of doing something that's possibly good enough that they end up never taking the risk of doing anything. So perfectionism could be an enemy, but striving for competency and striving for mastery is a very basic human drive. It is one of the most basic human drives. It's the reason why when you're born and you can't walk and you can't talk and you can't even yet figure out how to focus your cornea so that you can see clearly, and you start figuring all this stuff out. You know how exhausting that is? I mean, can you imagine how exhausting that is? And to learn how to walk and talk, to control your breathing and your tongue and your teeth. And we all do this. I mean, even children who are very, very developmentally delayed, but children who have a 65 and a 60 IQ, they still learn how to walk and talk. And they go at it with gusto. I mean, they work hard and hard and hard and full, right? I don't know what happens sometime between that age and then until they get like the 5th grade or somehow. Somehow we ruin that because they stop enjoying doing that. But that's not really where it's at. Like there's this huge drive to be competent and to master something. Somehow or another we kill it off. I'm not exactly sure how we do that because like, by the time we're adults, not everybody feels that way anymore. And certainly a lot of school children don't feel that way anymore, but they don't start that way. You never ever see a lazy baby. You just don't see it. You just don't see a baby that out of laziness doesn't learn how to talk or walk. You don't see it. And so it's fascinating. So here we have this tremendous drive for mastery, right? That can have a very dark side. It can be a really dark side. And it can lead to this evil. It could lead to blasphemy. It could lead to denying God's own pleas. But you also have this drive. So what do you think you, as a parent, what do you do with this really incredible energy that's actually in everybody? What do you do with it? Any thoughts?
Gear in the right way.
How? What do you do? Respecting this power. And what do you do? Got to discipline your children. They got to do their homework. They got to get up in the morning for school.
Encourage them to teach them what they do good, give them feedback.
Okay, so if you give them feedback, so what you're really saying is if you give them feedback, it might encourage them to do more because they, after all, want to feel good about what they're doing. Right? Does that sound like a plan? Is there any way that plan can go wrong? It's a good suggestion, I think.
Set boundaries.
Well, it's a good idea to set boundaries, but how would that work? Why would that feed into the mastery piece?
Use his strength for what he wanted to achieve.
I'm sorry, when something about constraints?
Use his strength to what you want him to achieve.
Right, use the strengths. So that's interesting, right? That everybody has strengths. So the question is, how do you take this child's strengths and have them build on it? So there's actually in one of the there's different types of psychotherapy techniques, and there's something that's known as looking for the exception. Let's say somebody tells you, "I'm depressed," right? And you say, "Well, what do you mean you're depressed?" "Well, I never get up every day and I have no energy," right? That sounds really depressing, doesn't it? You really need to see a professional. I don't know what you see me for. I don't know what to do. Whoa, that's pretty depressing, right? You hear something like that, you don't know what to do. We're supposed to tell somebody who says they have no energy, they can't get up. But here's the interesting thing. You ask them, is there ever a time that you do get up? Is there ever a time that you feel the energy up, get up? Well, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago, I was feeling a particularly good mood or whatever, or it was a family simple or blah, 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 and I got up and I was really feeling great. Oh, so sometimes you do have that. So where does that come from? Right? That's kind of like what you were driving at, right? You look for the exception and you find out why that works. But I think what you're saying about, let's say, giving feedback is good. The trick is that the feedback has to be, this is where it's very tricky. The feedback has to be from the sense, let me try to find the right words. It has to be localized to the place of meaning of the child. I'm trying to say it without jargon. Let me give you an example. If you have a child, right, that studies for a test really hard, okay? Or doesn't study so hard, for that matter, or does anything in between and comes home with a good grade on the test. If your remark is, wow, you got a 90 on the test, that's fantastic, you haven't localized what they actually did. Right? If they put in an extra hour of studying, even though they were tired, that was in the science, so to speak. That's the thing you want to say. Wow, I saw that yesterday you really were studying extra. That probably is a big reason why you got a better grade on the test. That's impressive. Or even something like if you have a child who, let's say, didn't do so well on the test. But look at the test. What if one question was answered well? So you can say, I noticed that you took the time to answer that question, and you knew the answer to that question well, and you put it out there, even though you didn't know the answers to the other questions. That's good. What was going on there that you knew the answer to that question? But that's along those lines. The point is, we can go further, but I want us to also cover some other sources and other ideas, just like little nuggets to take away from tonight. To think about, it's a double-edged sword. Children, like Yeruvam ben Nevat, they'll want to be on top. And if they can't be on top in one way, they might want to be on top in the other way. Like there's an angle here we didn't cover, which is that if Yeruvam couldn't be the best of the best, then he has to go down in history as the worst of the worst, which indeed he was one of the most notorious kings of Israel, notorious not in a good way. So that's what happens. A child will choose a way to be confident in something that gets the energy. If they can't feel confident or on top in something good, they might find a way to feel confident or on top in something not so good. So, there's another piece here that's going on. I also think what's fascinating about all this is after all said and done, God's chasing after him. What does that say to us as parents? It says that our job, it's not an easy job, not an easy job at all, but it says that to some degree, not in a craven way with no boundaries, but to some degree, our job is to love our children and continue to invite them and make them offers. If they don't take the offer, maybe they don't take the offer, but the fact is that we're making the offer. So anyway, that's source number one. Anybody want to say anything else about source number one before we go to source number two? All thoughts are welcome. You never know. Extra thoughts somebody has to say. Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
So just to be clear, how would you apply it in parenting this specific example would be just to make sure when we do notice something to be specific in verbalizing that to the child?
Find what makes them feel confident about it. They're doing it for some reason, And it might not be the reason you think. You know, maybe it's to make friends. Maybe it's to be popular. You know, I'm just saying, the closer you get to tagging, what really is coming from their wish to be competent and masterful, the more likely you're going to get a hit, so to speak.
And that's from any age?
Yeah, because it's universal. It's universal of human nature. We all want to be competent. That's what we're all seeking to do. We're all looking for that. We're all looking to be competent and be noticed for our competency. To the extent that we're even willing to gain notoriety for something, you know, in a bad way if we have to. If that's what it comes down to it. Better that than being ignored, goodness. So, but anyway, the point is to understand that maybe even a child that's not doing well is struggling to be competent. And you have to find a way for them to have a win. Not a fake win. That's the thing, not a fake win, because they'll know if it's fake. But, like I said, it may be good enough for a child that's not doing so well in school. I'd like you to answer one question on the test really good. And how would that be? And then we'll come back and we'll look at it and we'll know that you knew one question really good. Like anything that's in the direction of competency and mastery. But again, it has to be, they have to buy it. It's like you have to be dealing in their currency. If you're dealing in dollars and they're dealing in Bitcoin, this got no value to them. It has to really be valuable in their world of meaning, which, you know, takes a little intuition, a little discussion, and of course it's different by age. For a young child, just building the tower and the parents saying, "Well, you built a tower." That's great. We'll talk a little bit more about younger children in one of the later sources. So let's do source number 2. And, you know, again, try if you can to talk to each other. Maybe if you did follow the directions, some of you are direction followers, some of you are not, which is fine. I respect that. I didn't follow a lot of directions in school. So, but if you are a direction follower, which might be a good thing, you can now have the other person read and the other person react to it. And if you're not following directions, just do whatever you do that makes you feel good, because you're doing it for yourself, not for me. Okay, so little innocuous story over there. Things about these midrashim oftentimes, I would say they drop these lines, and you know, you kind of learn them when you're a little kid, and so you never really think about them, and so like you go through your whole life relating to these midrashim like they're little fairy tales. You learn as a little kid, you don't let your adult mind to really reflect on it. But this is really a very bizarre little teaching over here. Like, think about it for a second. What's your reaction to this? What's going on here? Anybody, any thoughts? Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if I interpreted it correctly, but it seems to me like the tree wants to survive.
Okay, and?
It doesn't want to do what it's being told.
Well, why would not doing what it's told cause it to survive more?
It's think what it says here is that the fruit of the tree itself will taste the same. So what's to stop the person from eating the tree itself?
That's just brilliant. See, this is what I love. I love when you like throw Midrashim at people randomly and they look at it with fresh eyes. I never heard that before. I mean, that's absolutely ingenious. You understand what he's saying? Like the story, right? The story is that the trees are disobeying God. That's clear in the Midrash. You know, well, what in the world is that supposed to mean? But that's what it's saying, right? When you're saying something even deeper, you're saying they're disobeying with a motive. There's a crime and a motive. That's fascinating. I think there's where to go with that. I think that's really good. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes.
When you said the tree limb was, I took it as the earth production.
Okay.
The earth was supposed to sprout trees that faces in the tree. And the earth is listen and created a tree that created itself.
Chain of command. It all goes back to the Mother Earth. It's all the mother's fault. It's not really the tree's fault. It's the mother's fault.
I mean, I had a question on the sake where, Hashem had a plan, right? And he said that he wants something to happen, but it didn't happen.
Yes.
So I kind of like thought of it as like, he's all perfect, like whatever he wants, he gets.
Yes.
And especially he's created it.
Yes. How bizarre.
But then we are also his creations, and he wants us to be good.
Yes.
But then it's our choice whether to be good or not.
Yes.
Does that apply to the earth as well?
Looks like that's what that Midrash is saying. So our friend over here is telling us that this is interesting. God is perfect and he has a plan and it doesn't work out. The trees don't even listen to him. This is what? This is like the third day of creation. I think it's the third day of creation. Already things are going wrong. Nothing's going on. It's very upsetting. But yes, we also don't, do we? Right, we also don't. But yes, it's very deep, isn't it? It's very deep. There's more. Does anything go according to plan? What else doesn't go according to plan? I mean, the whole Sefer Bereshis. What goes according to plan? Someone please tell me something that actually goes according to plan.
A tree yielding fruit.
What?
A tree yielding fruit.
Well, they did yield the fruits, that's true, at least that. But I mean, do Adam and Chava live happily ever off in the Garden of Eden? No. Do Cain and Abel get along well? No. Do Joseph and the brothers get along well? No. Does anybody get along well? Isn't that fascinating? I mean, I think that that's the most powerful message. Even if, I actually think what you said, there might be a lot to it. Meaning to say that, right? We can look at this like as a metaphor and say that the message is that we have to be accepting that things don't go according to plan, and that maybe even the part what you're saying is that maybe by necessity, for things to live, they have to be independent. And for them to be independent, that means they take on life of their own. And so for our children to be themselves, we can get them to behave. One day they'll probably come up with medication that'll get them all to behave perfectly, right? But that would really be a bad thing, wouldn't it? That would really be a bad thing, like if they do that. If they come up with the perfect medication that gets every child to behave perfectly. Sometimes I wonder, like if the Gra or the Baal Shem Tov, is alive today, they put them on Ritalin and that would be it. No more Hasidus. Wouldn't exist, because just be sitting quietly, just learning away. I don't know. I mean, I wonder, right? So I don't know. Maybe, but the point is, I think, regardless of those heady issues as to whether or not all these medications are helping anybody or not, but there is something about to let things be, they have to be. Right? So God's got this plan, just like we as parents have these plans. I mean, we have these really big aspirations. And we really want our children to have better than us and do better than us. And it's just so beautiful, really. The problem is that for them to be, they have to be. And if they're going to be, they're not going to be us. And if they're not going to be us, they're not going to do exactly what we plan. And it doesn't matter whether it's a fruit tree that's called what you want. I'm borrowing the term, but it's evolving in some way because after it's created, God's letting it do its thing. Or it's a human being, or we're parents. It's all just playing out. And if we didn't, yes, then they'd be eaten alive because they wouldn't really be alive. Right? So, what does that tell us? Well, it tells us, we've got to be very patient. Because as much as we really need our children to behave, and they should, we were talking before about setting boundaries, there's a balance between that and also independence and the need, the basic human need to differentiate and be different and strike out on your own. And so it's complicated. And you actually notice that in Judaism, there aren't usually absolutes. There usually are like dynamics between poles, like there's midat hadin and midat harachamim, right? Like there isn't one or the other, right? There's ava and there's yira. Like a lot of things in Judaism, it's not like it's one thing. It's somehow or another staying between these two poles. And I think there's this thing about independence and even a certain kind of disobedience, a certain kind of chutzpah, as it were, and then also, obviously, following rules and behaving. And somehow or another, we have to work with our children to respect the fact that they may need to be different. And at the same time, somehow we have to also, discipline them. Okay. Any other comments? Please, some of the comments are just fantastic. So don't hold back. And at the same time, we can go forward. Any last comment or thought? Okay, rolling right along. So up to source number 3. This is a very interesting idea. Okay. So, what are you noticing? What are you noticing about this little segment here from the Gemara? Yes, sir.
Kids will be kids, and let them do what they do.
Kids will be kids.
Let them do what they do.
Let them do what they do. Yes, it looks like is it just let them do what they do?
To an extent.
Okay. Different stages. Right. So it's at a certain stage they can be let to do. You notice how, right? The first part of the Gemara is not accidental, right? They're talking about actual, I suppose, their digestive or nutritious needs, I guess, in their time that they considered. So it's not an accident. They're linked together. So the Gemara here is linking like psychological, emotional development with physical development. and not necessarily seeing them as anything different. That just like at different stages in your life, you need different kinds of foods, so you also need different kinds of experiences. Right? Anything else? Anybody else noticing anything from this Gemara? Yes.
Basically, as the children grow, their different stages of their lives, sometimes they will not always need to have the same things to thrive.
Yes.
And as parents, I guess we look at the to their needs.
Right, so we have to acclimate to their needs, and maybe also acclimate them, right, to the whatever the demands or the expectations are of society. Like, I don't know how the Gemara doesn't really talk about like how they toilet train their children. I'm not saying this to make jokes. They really don't talk about that. So like it's hard to know how and when they made those demands of children and said like you need to now, so to speak, be responsible for yourself. It's interesting, right? But in some ways, their lives were a lot more simpler. They probably took on different responsibilities sooner because life was simpler. It's not just a medrash, by the way, about Rivka. Like Rivka's 3 years old and she's walking with Rachel's walking with Lavan's sheep. Actually, like even to this day, like African tribes children, like at 5 years old, can take like the cattle like miles away from wherever their village is and go and come back. Like kids can do a lot of stuff that they're taught to. It wouldn't be a good idea on New York City streets to let your 5-year-old wander around, but apparently they're able to do a lot of different things. I don't know, but there is a developmental process, right? But there's something else interesting going on over here. Right? Are we just letting kids be kids? Yes, sir.
It seems to me like he's getting advice preparing him for the process before it starts.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, he says, advice that my mother told me. It's like this is before this whole thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
He's sort of learning about the process before the child comes along.
And isn't it nice he's listening to his mother? Right?
Yeah, it's one of a source of someone who knows how
Yeah.
these things work.
Remember the Talmud, is pretty stingy. He's pretty stingy with his words, and it's recorded for posterity. And for now, I suppose about 1,800 years. It's 1,800 years old. This text, right? Rabbi was in Amora. I think he lived around year 300. Yeah, it's about that. So like, and they're recording. What his mother told him. It's kind of sweet, isn't it? Right? And he's getting, yes, I think he's figuring out how to parent from this kind of folk wisdom that his mother had. It's very interesting. But you were going to say something.
It seems like the presumption is that vessels are expensive. So, and they're telling me that he's going to break that at the stage that they're going through, and we should not be scolded for that. Therefore, maybe we should buy them some cracked vessels because they're going to break them for enjoyment.
Right, it says two things, right? If you're going to read it literally, he bought cracked ceramic vessels. One, was that you have a thought too?
No,
You could, I don't want to cause a fight or anything. You could disagree.
I actually agree.
Yeah. So there's two things going on here. Rabbah bought cracked vessels, and then they broke them for their enjoyment. Right? It wasn't just like, oh, we'll give you, the plastic cup, not the glasses, because you might come and break, the glasses. Right? He kind of is expecting them to break them and recognize that they're going to enjoy that. Right? So at some age, right, we're not allowed to do that. It says in it's a Gemara in Shabbos on Kuf Hey, that you cannot, right, if you break vessels out of anger, it's as if you're committing idolatry, because what's linked to idolatry? Well, the way the Gemara sees things is that, there's a slippery slope. Right? Once you give in to your animal urges, it's just a matter of time before you descend all the way down to the bottom. So if you're going to break something out of anger and not check that impulse and not learn how to manage your impulses, you'll eventually end up all the way, worshiping idols. But leaving alone, the Gemara's way of looking at the world, the point is that we're not allowed to break things. We're not allowed to break things. And even if we didn't do it out of anger, it still would be paltashkas. We're not allowed to destroy, utensils for no reason whatsoever. They have this really weird thing. You look it up. Rage rules. That is. Only in a world that has way too much could anybody have ever thought of such an insane thing. People pay money to go into a room where they smash stuff. That's not okay. That's not okay. That's okay for little kids. It's not okay for adults. But anyway, the point is, at some point as parents, we have to know when it's okay for them to do this, and when it's okay, we celebrate it, and actually we enable it, we buy it for them, right? And when it's not okay for them, we need to know that too. Is there any hint here as to how we're supposed to know? Tough one, huh?
When they stop enjoying.
That's interesting. So that's interesting, but would that be true? Like, if you gave a child, it's a very interesting point. It could be with some children, yes. But I wonder, if you gave a child constantly what they wanted, and you let them get it out of their system until they stop enjoying it, would that be the only benchmark? If I said, well, only, you can have recess until you're finished having recess. I don't know if that would work, right? But the other way wouldn't work too. If you just said, if let's say the kids had a real need. There's a true story. My father was a mechanech for his whole life, which is to say that he was a mechanech for 33 years of his life. No, sorry, that's wrong. No, 53 years of his life. Very bad at math, didn't do well in math. 63 years of his life he was a mechanech. Till the day he died, actually. He died right after giving a class. He said, I'm not feeling well, and then just like that. But he's alive here today when I quote him. So he taught thousands of teachers in the last 20 years of his career. Till then he was a school principal in different schools throughout the country. He actually was once the principal of YCQ right over here a long time ago, about 45 years ago. But anyway, and he taught a lot of teachers. The last 20 years he was a professor at YU's Israeli Graduate School of Education. Anyway, he's one famous story about him was there was a snowstorm, and they were all, the kids were in the class, and obviously they were just going bonkers. Why would kids not go bonkers if there was a snowstorm? And he posed to the class, meaning to say, he did this, but then he posed it to, I heard it from one of his students at the graduate school, he posed it to his students, what would you do? You walk into class, the kids are going bonkers, there's a snowstorm, they all want to go outside and play, they certainly don't want to learn anything, what would you do? People came with different ideas, but his answer was very much, he was channeling Rabbi. He said, tell them we're going to look at the snow for 10 minutes. We're going to go to that window, and we're going to look at that snow, and we're going to enjoy looking at that snow for 10 minutes, and then we're going to go back to the lesson. Supposedly it worked. But the idea is, I don't know, right? If you said to the kids, you can look at the snow until you get tired of looking at the snow, they might have got tired of looking at the snow until like 3 days from now. Right? But certain children, yes, there are children that do have like an innate self-regulation.
But if they know that they can't play with it, it's going to be boring eventually to look at it.
Well, he wasn't doing it because of that. They were going to have recess. It's just they couldn't go to recess now. So he just wanted to give them fun looking out the window because that's what they were doing anyway when he walked into the room. But I'm worried about the time. I want to give everybody the full thing. So I'll just say as follows. I think the Gemara is hinting because it starts out with food. And it's saying, how do you know what's the right food for your child? You see how they digest it. You see how they take it in. You see if they can tolerate it. So I think it's saying respect the child's development. Obviously, there's certain intuitions that you have to have, or maybe even trial and error. Maybe you give a child a certain food and they're not ready to take it yet, so you back off. Or you notice that they're hungry for a certain food, even more hungry than your other children at that age, and you give it to them earlier. So I think by the Gemara juxtaposing it, the Gemara is really saying there's a developmental process. So I do want to keep somewhat to the time schedule. So I'm going to run a little bit faster for the last two. And I'll just talk about people really need to, I can't describe it. Look at yourselves for 2 minutes, the source number 4, okay? Take 2 minutes. Okay, so this is a Mishnah in Shabbos. Describes an interesting scenario. A stone is muksa. We don't hold stones on Shabbos. Just to understand, the stone is also one of the most severe forms of muksa. There's different kinds of muksa, but a stone, you can't even move it aside. If you need the space, it has a much more strict form of muksa because it has absolutely no designated purpose. So here the poor child's holding the stone, and basically the father, it's permitted for the father to pick the child up, even though he's holding the stone, right? And the basic answer, one of the questions that comes up is, why don't you just take the stone out of the kid's hands, or shake it out of his hands? But Tosfos says no, because the boy's going to cry. He's not going to be happy with that. So we have a dilemma here. Basically, the scenario is the child wants the stone, and the child wants the father. And the Gemara actually goes into this in detail. The Gemara says, I don't know if this is true today. Certain things change psychologically, and they have different meanings. But in the Talmud Gemara, there was this thing called Tinok Sheyesh Lo Ga'guin Al Aviv. A child who needs his father, not the mother. It's very interesting. The father. And that somehow know that distress is not met, it's considered very dangerous. We can say, well, what do they know about medicine and science, right? But, what do we know about medicine and science? We're on like the 19th booster or something. We're still trying to, I'm just saying that there are fascinating things. There's so much respect. That's what I really want to get at. We don't have time to have much of a dialogue. There's so much respect for the subjectivity of a person's emotions and distress. Something I think is terrible today, and I see it so much, and I'm sure many of the women in this crowd relate to this, is how little respect is given to pregnancy. It's as if kind of like you're just pregnant, and you zip along, and then, you pop out a baby, and you go back to work, or they're nice to give you 6 weeks off, or whatever it is. I mean, everybody's different. There's some, I'm sure some of you will tell you, from your own experience. I mean, pregnancy is a whole other world. For some people, they're sick for 9 months straight. For some people, they're sick for 2 years straight. Between, pregnancy and postpartum. Now we call it almost postpartum depression. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. We're not trying to minimize it, but I'm saying it's also life. And part of it's about not respecting, life. Like in one of the 10 nisim in the Beis HaMikdash was that a pregnant woman, did not smell the meat of the sacrifice and desire the meat of the sacrifice because it's a bit of a discussion, but because presumably if she did, we would have given her to eat it from the meat of the karbanos. And even if we wouldn't have, the point is in every other situation, it would have been taken extremely seriously. The cravings of a pregnant woman. Like there's some things I feel we look at, they were so primitive then, they didn't know anything. They knew a lot, and they respected people a whole lot more than we respect people. A baby is desiring his father, you don't just say, oh, a crybaby. You're like, no, you have to take that very seriously. The child's in distress. Well, he'll just cry it out. Who says that's a good thing to just cry it out? Who says that's okay? Maybe that's not okay. You know, or who says it's good? Well, she's just crazy. Come on, it's a big deal. You know, who says that's okay? Anyway, I think one of the fascinating things about this little piece is that the subjective distress. When I say subjective, I mean not what you think it's supposed to feel like, but what the person seems to be feeling is really paramount. Right? It doesn't mean always, every time the world has to stop if a child needs something. But wow, look how much respect is going on here for this child's distress. Right? No one's saying, oh, he'll get over it. Right? It doesn't say that over. It doesn't say, I don't say anything about it, yeah, he'll get over it. It doesn't say that. Right? It doesn't say, you have to discipline him. You got to teach him how to be a man. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. It actually says that if the father doesn't hold him, and that will include holding the stone, which is muksa, child will be in danger. What more can we say? That's unbelievable. Right? That's really very beautiful. Obviously, again, we're talking about a child. If he was 12 or 13, maybe there would be a different response. You know, see our earlier source. Somehow or another, you have to figure out where they're up to in their development. But that's a very powerful point. And I just add how it applies in relationships. I think people's subjective distress should always be respected. If somebody tells you that they're in pain about something, even if they're an adult, doesn't mean you always can accommodate that. But a lot of times our defense, you know, if someone has a need and we feel that anguish, and you're walking in the street and some beggar is asking for money, and you're in conflict about whether you should give them or not. There's all kinds of reasons why you might be in conflict. A lot of times it's hard not to come up with a reason. If we're going to say no, it's hard to come up with a reason to also hate them. You know, they're stinky, they're poor, they're drug addicts, right? Because, like, we can't sit with the need. We have to also diminish the need. It's not enough that for whatever reason we can't gratify the need. Maybe we should gratify the need. Maybe they are drug addicts. Maybe they shouldn't get the money or whatever. But we have to also diminish the other person. That's not a good thing. Like, if somebody is in distress, we should really respect that they're in distress. Now we have to decide, should we be organized by that distress? Should we respond to that distress by giving in to what they need? Or maybe there's something else we're supposed to do. But it doesn't say anywhere that we're supposed to diminish and belittle, you know, and have contempt for that subjective need. So one last source. I'll give you again a couple minutes to look at. This is a fascinating one. Okay, so we're going to, for time purposes, we're going to jump right into the question. I assume you did read this. So, how do you see an application of this teaching? Like, what's being said over there? Yes.
Teacher might once said, don't teach your child something by doing, like, let's say, for example, you don't hit your kid and say, don't hit.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's the same thing that he's saying here, because he's saying that, you know, he's hitting his kid, and in the end, he can come to hit his father because he's basically teaching him this is correct.
Okay, so what you're saying, which has a place, although I'll tell you it's not what the Gemara is saying, but that doesn't mean what you're saying doesn't have some wisdom to it, saying don't expect to teach your child a behavior if you don't model that behavior. So if you hit, your child will also come to him. The problem with that is, even though what you're saying would seem to make sense, it's definitely not the Gemara's value system, because they actually did believe in corporal punishment toward children, and even at times in extreme circumstances, adults. But they didn't necessarily say that you should hit out of anger. That's number one, which is very different, because you are teaching, if you hit out of anger, you're teaching you're out of control. But and also in our time, it just may not be wise to hit kids anymore. You know, you have to also understand how people take in stuff today, so it may not work. But that brings us to the other part. You see, the Gemara doesn't actually say adult. That's Safaria's lovely translation, which is not necessarily incorrect, but the actual Lashon of the Gemara is Beno HaGadol, his older son, his big son. And there actually is a very big discussion as to what does Gadol mean. Does it mean Bar Mitzvah? Not really. It really means just old. So, like some of the commentaries, I think the Kizer Shulchan Aruch says this, Rav Wolbe says this. I think that it's old enough that he will not be, that he will not tolerate this form of discipline anymore and lash back, and lash out. Now that actually, relates to, could be today, children have a much stronger sense of independence, stronger sense of themselves, and maybe even much younger children wouldn't react well to being hit anymore. Maybe they need to be reasoned with differently. But what it is saying is that there is a line. So in the Gemara, let's say it was age 10 or 15, I don't even know. At an earlier time, it was a different age. But there's a line where if you know that the child has enough aggression that they're going to strike back, that's already that's already provoking a child to do something. So it's really saying, don't administer a punishment that you believe there's a decent chance that it's going to induce an aggressive response. You have to extrapolate from this, because Lifnei Iver L'Sitei Mishal is a general principle, and they're quoting this injunction that you're not allowed to cause another person to sin. And the statement that they're making over here is, if you know that your child's going to react aggressively to your aggression, you no longer can do it. That is causing them to sin. Even though you're the parent, you should. But the answer is, because if you already think there's a decent chance that he or she's not going to respond well, so it really doesn't have to do any more with hitting. It really has to do with anything. It's really saying, don't do something as a parent that you need to do for discipline if you think it's going to be likely as not, induce a very destructive response. So what do we do? I don't know. That's a good question. That's a very challenging question. How do you discipline children? It's a big question. But the fact that you have a question doesn't mean that you can grab any old answer just because you have the question. Right? Well, what else am I supposed to do? That's not an answer. What else am I supposed to do? Because you can't do this. Right? Well, you can't let them run around wild either. You have a problem. You got to be very creative, really work hard and figure out what you want to do. And there are things that you can do. We talked about some of them a bit. We did talk about looking for where they can have mastery, giving them an opportunity to have mastery and be successful. You might have to actually use some reasoning and discussion. There may be some punishments that you have to do at certain ages. But again, you have to think about the energy. A punishment that comes without warning, a punishment that comes with a lot of personal aggression and ego. Those two things together, those are very, 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 very bad magic. Very, very bad morsha. Right? Those are two killers. Right? If you give a punishment, number one, it comes without any warning. So you're already throwing the kid off. And number two, you've got a lot of aggressive energy and ego in it. So it becomes a battle of wills. Who's first? Ben Yeshai or me? You're in a lot of trouble. If there's discussion, contemplation, and even-handedness, and it comes out of respect, like, listen, we discussed these rules, and we said that if you come home late, you won't be able to go out the next day or whatever it is. We talked about this, and you know this, and I think we have to do this now, so you realize that the rules are serious. I'm not saying every child's going to take that, but there's a much greater likelihood they're going to take it that way. The point is, you can't do it in a way that you know you're going to induce an aggressive response. Okay, so we covered 5 different sort of ideas and sources, and just to wrap up, I wanted to give people the opportunity to share. What are you walking out of today with? You walking out with anything? Okay, food. But anything else? Anything new? You don't have to make me happy, but it's very nice of you. So what are you walking out with? What are you coming out with?
I mean, I guess in my life, I guess I feel there are certain features that I grew up with that things are like features.
Mhm.
So like one of my kids, I can see him crying, and like my natural state would be like, okay, let's cry. You know?
Mhm.
But it's like this, reminder that it's not just one cry. Let's find out exactly what it was.
Okay, so you're thinking, maybe you're doing a great job, maybe you don't need any of this, but you're thinking, from listening to this, maybe if my child's crying, maybe this one I should be more attuned to. Maybe there is something that they need a response to. Again, you can't figure out a parent from the Gemara. You can't figure out a parent from anybody. So there's no such thing as a rule, really. But sometimes it's good to consider other ideas and see where they take you. But yes, thank you. Anybody else walking out with anything? Yes.
To me, it was like the breaking of the object. It was like very hard for me to understand why he would explain that, but I guess now I see that it's part of their normal developmental process just for the sake of actually breaking it.
Yes, it seems so, right? It seems like it is surprising. I wouldn't have thought so. There are studies about this that people say get it out, let out your anger. Letting out your anger doesn't actually make anybody feel any better. This is true. It does not make you feel better to let out your anger. It will make you feel better to talk about why you're angry and have somebody actually hear and understand why you're angry. That feels good. But just smashing things out of anger really doesn't make you feel better. But it's interesting that apparently at a certain age, it's a need. It's a need, just like other things are needs. Now it's the Gemara, the greatest, psychological tract and commentary on human nature. The Gemara doesn't purport itself to be that. So I don't know how seriously, there's a famous saying, "Ein l'meid min ha'agadas." We don't pass on halachas from agadas. So I don't know whether or not this represents, the final word on human nature, but it's an interesting idea to consider, isn't it? That especially, certainly boys, right? Boys will be boys. Sometimes it can be very difficult when they're running around wild and doing crazy things. But maybe they need to run around wild and do crazy things to some extent. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
If I understood you correctly, concerning punishing and stuff like that, I like what you were saying, or I thought you said, I mean to say was that if you're giving a punishment or you're criticizing, if the person or the kid, the child, I think we apply to anyone, if they're not going to respond well to it, or it's not going to have a positive outcome, then it's kind of pointless of doing it. It's
Right.
making things worse.
Right. So that doesn't mean that we know what to do. Right? That's the other question.
We just
What
know
are we
not
going to
to,
do?
not to do.
Right, because it feels really good to get angry. It does. But there's you ever hear of the word I think it's called how does it go? Is it an anger hangover or an hangover? When you get angry, at that moment it feels really good because at that moment you just have that adrenaline and you're overcoming this sense of powerlessness. Because kids have a way of really humbling us and making us feel pretty powerless. But afterwards, yes, what does it really get us in the end? It doesn't really get us anywhere. So what do? We have to figure it out. It's not easy. It's not easy. And going back to the second Malcolm, to the second source, maybe things just don't always work out. Like you try your best, you try to be a good parent, you try to offer your guidance, you do the best that you can. Maybe they don't work out the way they're supposed to work out. That's tough. It's really rough. But are we better than Avram, who had stress with Yitzchak and Yaakov? Are we better than Yitzchak and Yishmael? Are we better than Yaakov, who had stress with his with the Shvatim? Are we better than Yitzchak, who had to deal with Yaakov and Esau? Are we better than them? Okay, we're going to say yes, they're very different. Yes, okay. But you know what? The end is like Ein Bikr Yosef Dik Shutta. Clearly on some level, these were families that, on their level, were not going along like really perfectly. They weren't exactly, dancing the horror together and seeking kumbaya. There was real family, discord. And I guess that's what life is like. We're going to try our best. We're going to try our best, but it doesn't always work out exactly the way we want it to. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have a lot of heart. It doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of joy and great experiences in it too. The story of Yosef is the longest running story in the Torah, by the way. That is true. It occupies the most sukkim and the most prakim. It's the longest running story in the Torah, and it's one of the most fascinating stories. And it does kind of have a happy ending at the end. But wow, what a story, right? Whew. Not easy. It's got all the elements of every great story. Bloodshed, jealousy, rise to fame, crushing defeats, rise back to fame again. There's even a lover in the story. It's unbelievable drama. And really very beautiful in the end. But a real story. People just struggling, trying to make it work. Anyway, last thoughts, comments. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Hope you had a good time.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you everyone for staying. And thank you so much for the very thoughtful and encouraging a lot of discussion and thought. You can find, so you have a website, right?
Yeah, just go in.
So you have his contact info on the top. Thanks again, Shai, for organizing everything. And let's hear for Shai. There's going to be a survey form that goes out, so please just respond so we can get your feedback. And I just want to add one really quick point, that the more we work on these topics and the more we work on our parenting skills, we're able to have more confidence in our parenting abilities. Confidence doesn't mean that you know everything. Confidence means that you're talking with one voice, more or less, with your spouse. And sometimes I find this, but I think all of us sometimes find ourselves that we're like, our children are sort of asking us, are you telling me or asking me? Right? Because we're not speaking with clarity, so that we're not giving over a sense of clarity. And we might think that, this is nice of us, but like I said earlier, I think Simple was also talking about, children are looking for structure and clarity, and they want to be heard, they want to feel that friendship with us, they also want they also want that structure, they also want that clarity. So I think that we try to take this point to home, and work on having work on our parenting skills, and work on how we communicate with each other, and everyone. Have a good night.
Do we have 10 people interested in the davening release? Yeah? No?